All right, episode 5. Hello, everybody. My name is Nathan Faugh. I am a licensed clinical addiction counselor. This is Bridget Sherwood. She's a licensed addiction counselor. So, what are we talking about today, Bridget?
Today we're going to talk about harm reduction and how it is important and beneficial to not only people who are actively using, but the community as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's it's a good follow-up to what we talked about last week. I mean, last week kind of being a dark history and kind of looking back at some of the, I guess some of the kind of terrible things that have been done throughout history in the name of science and medicine. But this, I guess, maybe isn't that new of an idea. I think when I looked at it, I think harm reduction kind of first, you know, the idea of it kind of first came sometime in the 80s, but really hasn't been something, that maybe been, well, I shouldn't say it hasn't been talked about, but it seems like it's a difficult kind of topic for, or it's a difficult concept for people to wrap their heads around. So, I mean, I suppose that's maybe where we should start is just kind of maybe defining what harm reduction is.
And I think that's a huge part of it is trying to not necessarily enable people or to promote using, but to promote a safer way. Again, not just for the person that's using, but for society as well. I'll just read this bit here that I pulled from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration on why harm reduction services are needed. And it just says the U.S. is experiencing the most significant substance use and overdose epidemic it has ever faced, exacerbated by the recent worldwide pandemic and driven by the proliferation of highly potent synthetic opioids containing fentanyl or fentanyl analogs and animal tranquilizers, which we've recently seen, xylazine, and to many types of drugs, including stimulants and counterfeit prescription pills. And we've had reports here, I think in North Dakota, about fentanyl and xylazine being found in even marijuana. There were more than 100,000 drug-involved overdose deaths in 2022 alone.
Mm-hmm. The numbers are crazy. I mean, the other thing too that I think is important is, when we talk about harm reduction, as with with what you just read, I mean, a lot of the focus is on substance use, reducing substance like overdose deaths, but there's more to harm reduction as well too. I mean, we're looking at trying to cut down, manage infectious diseases is a big part of it. It is about trying to help people to manage, some of the illnesses and some of the other things that come from substance use, probably more primarily related to needle use, but it is about actually kind of treating the entire person, helping them to, be healthy, I suppose, at least to the best that they can be, despite, their substance use, despite, their disease.
Well, even giving them access to services, I mean, the way that I look at it is it's getting their foot in the door. If they're not ready to stop using, if they're not willing to go to treatment, then they at least have places where they can go to use safely, to be able to have access to clean needles, be provided with medical care, and who knows if they are able to address some of the issues, whether it's medical or the substance use or mental health, it's a good starting point. It's the trial and error, even with the stuff that we talked about last week, this applies here. Treatment isn't always going to work for people the first, second, third, and so forth time around. But if we can at least meet them where they're at, there's still hope. And that's, I think, where this started, was meeting people where they're at.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, that's a really main point of all of this is meeting people where that, well, and accepting them where they're at. I mean, I guess I would say, from my standpoint, I mean, abstinence is, I would say, going to probably be the best outcome for anybody, but at the same time, I mean, like what you're getting at there, it might not be realistic for that person. And also, I mean, it's not taking into account, relapse. I mean, to think that, going through life from like using every day for, an extended period of time to all of a sudden you're just going to stop and be clean for the rest of your life is probably not very realistic. And I think we see that, on a daily basis that, people can get out and can do really well for a while, they slip up. But I think that's where, we really need to, kind of change this narrative in a sense. Is
Well, I think there should still be credit given with the amount of time that they were successful in not using.
I realize kind of what I'm talking about here takes us a little bit away from harm reduction, but I think that it's relevant in the sense that, like with other chronic illnesses, it's about managing the disease more than it is maybe just completely eliminating the disease. And that may not always look the way that we want it to look or think that it should look, especially from a substance use standpoint, where it's like, well, they should just stop using. Well, maybe not realistic.
Well, and that's, like you said, with meeting people where they're at if they're not ready to stop using, the acceptance part is just accepting that right now they're not ready, right now they're not willing to stop using. So how do we help them to live the most manageable life that they can given the circumstances?
Well, you think about a lot of the consequences, that we see with like the people that we work with. I mean, like, they're going into, the hospital. I mean, their emergency services, whether it be police, firemen, ambulance services. I mean, I suppose you could even just say, crime committed within the community to, even like personal injury risk as where we started with overdoses. I mean, I guess where I'm going with this is there's a lot of cost associated with addiction, and that's kind of another piece to the harm reduction is, if we take the humanness out of it or whatever, if you just look at it from like, a cost saving, the cost saving benefit to society is great. I mean, it's like, I think for every, what did it say? I read something, I think it was in Australia, it was like for every dollar spent on like harm reduction, there was like a $4 return to society, or a $4 savings, as compared to if the person was left just with an untreated or unmanaged disease.
Well, and with the articles that I read through, I mean, there is this evidence, there are the facts that back up that harm reduction is effective in multiple ways. Um, and it's not just about like a needle exchange program. It's having access to overdose reversal drugs such as naloxone, and again, like that medical care. I don't remember what state it was in, but there are places where they had a special term for it. But it's essentially a safe place where people can go and use with there being oversight to avoid overdose, to avoid, I guess you can call it unhealthy using practices such as reusing dirty needles or sharing needles, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we can't, I guess not convince isn't the right word, but help people get to a point where they don't want to stop using, then we can at least help them remain safe.
Mm-hmm. I've been listening to an audiobook. I'll have to find the name of that, because I think it offers a lot of insight into addiction, and also how important harm reduction is. But it's from Vancouver is, where the guy's working. They have basically like set up an entire program. I mean, they have, I think, several, like, I think they call them hotels, but they're basically like, places for addicts, alcoholics to be able to live, with abstinence not being the goal, and they offer medical services, they offer the needle exchange programs, safe using sites. I mean, and yeah, they're finding that it's having a pretty, significantly positive impact, not just for the people that are active in their addictions, but the community around them as well. So the name of the book is In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and yeah, it was written by the guy's name is, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but Gabor Mate. He was the one of the physicians that worked at, specifically it's called the Portland, which is one of the hotels that um, in, I guess it's the Lower East Side in Vancouver, is where this kind of project or initiative is located at or whatever. And yeah, it's really interesting because it is a pretty graphic book. I will say that if you get into it, I mean, he doesn't really hold back in any of the language that he uses. But I think that's his point. He's trying to make it raw and real.
Well, and that's it. And I mean, we can talk about why this is important to have something like this going on. I mean, you look at the war on drugs and the result of that. The facts are that you can take away access to drugs, but people are going to find it because that's what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can have different options, then that's our responsibility as human beings and as a community.
Mm-hmm.
And accepting and just the reality of it that people are going to continue to use.
Yeah.
Abstinence is ideal, but it's not something that's going to happen for everyone. And I think that's a huge argument that people will make, is why are we doing this for drug addicts? Why are we doing this for junkies? They're, a poison to society. There's the homeless people. Well, because we need to give a shit. And we need to find ways to protect ourselves and to protect that group of people as well.
Mm-hmm.
If that means getting them off the street, if that means getting them medical care so that there aren't chronic illnesses being spread and untreated. And just, again, hoping that they will find a reason or a purpose to stop using or to greatly reduce their use.
I grabbed my notes because I wanted to just kind of read off here, just give I suppose, just a little bit more like thorough or more examples of kind of what actually is done at like harm reduction sites or whatever. So provide safer injection education, safer injection supplies, including syringes and other injection equipment, fentanyl and xylazine test strips that they can give to addicts so that they can test their drugs before they use them with the hope to again prevent overdose. Sharps container, safe secure syringe disposal, HIV, hepatitis C, and sexually transmitted disease prevention, education, and testing. Safer sex supplies, including condoms and dental dams. Rapid testing, well, I already said that, rapid testing for HIV and hepatitis C. Safer smoking education and supplies, nasal Narcan and injectable naloxone, overdose response and naloxone administration training, referrals to healthcare, substance use disorder treatment, behavioral health services, social services, housing, and more. I think that last piece is important too, kind of back to what we were saying about this isn't just like enabling somebody to use. It's about accepting them where they're at, but that doesn't mean that at these sites or whatever that they're not offering or trying to work with these clients to getting them into some sort of treatment program or helping them to either slow down or abstain from their use, but they're also not making that like the end all be all goal.
Well, I think we talked about this in one of our episodes when we were discussing shame. Not only from society's side of accepting the person who's still using, but the level of acceptance the active user can experience when they know there's help for them, that there are places that they can go instead of having to find somewhere to use or to try to get help at.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another really positive side of having harm reduction sites is reminding people that they're still people.
It seems like so much of society we just like discount people, and almost forget that, well, they're human, and they have a right to be treated with compassion and with dignity and with respect.
Well, and having empathy, I mean, I've experienced that as well, where someone comes in, and especially if it's their first time in treatment, and it doesn't even have to be their first time, when they're not here voluntarily, it's made known by them that they don't want to stop using, and just the response that I get when I tell them that's fine. I'm not here to tell you that you have to stop using. I'm here to help you find ways to help your life be manageable. So if that means that you want to continue to use, that's where you're at, and I'm fine with that. How can I help you in other areas?
Probably something else. I mean, that could be kind of brought up about this too is, especially on the treatment side of things, remembering that it's a process. I mean, yeah, maybe for some people there is like, you see kind of a very like steady progression through treatment and into recovery, but that definitely doesn't seem like, that's probably the normal. I mean, I remember, seeing something about the stages of change. Stages of change, I suppose just real briefly, I mean, it's just kind of a way to kind of assess where somebody's at in their level of motivation for change. But it, kind of represented it in the way of almost like a tornado or a cyclone, where, I mean, even if you started off in a place maybe where you were motivated, or even in a place where you were, had some success in your recovery or whatever, I mean, there was always this kind of cycling in and out of these kind of lower or earlier stages of change where, you might get complacent and really get back into kind of old ways of thinking to where, well, I don't know what the big deal is to have a problem, and just kind of that constant ebb and flow. And I think that is kind of important to keep in perspective too, that it's not a straightforward path. Well, I mean, we have people in, well, both are, kind of our more intensive programs, whether it be like your IOP program or with day treatment and like with our house and stuff like that. I mean, we have people in treatment for 2 months, which, 2 months seems like, a relatively long period of time, but it really isn't. I mean, as much as we're able to, kind of help people and move them along or whatever, I mean, it seems like we've barely scratched the surface by the time that they've reached the end of one of those programs. Which is, I guess, also why we really made a point to try to, kind of promote them continuing into more of a step-down program and continuing kind of involvement in, as you could say, more intensive services as they move out of some of those levels of care.
Well, and what you just made me think about was, again, looking at harm reduction, for somebody who's never directly experienced addiction, and knows very little about it, just lacks education on what that process looks like from active use to abstinence. What you're saying as far as 2 months not being long enough, people will say, well, why don't you just stop using? It's that simple, just don't do it. But it's not. And if you can start at a harm reduction point, you can slowly work towards abstinence. And what I'm saying with this is, we don't destroy our lives through use in a week or a month. It can be months, years. And so it's going to take at least that amount of time at a minimum to repair.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, if you've spent a lifetime in active addiction, to think that in like 8 weeks that you're gonna miraculously everything is gonna change, I mean, that's, that's not very realistic. It's gonna take a lifetime of hard work to unlearn all those behaviors. I mean, I've kind of talked about that with clients. It's like, take how much time you've put into getting to this point in your life. I mean, change is going to require that you put at least that amount of time into change.
Well, I think to draw a picture for the people who continue to struggle with an understanding of addiction, it's like building a house, right? So maybe harm reduction, or at least the first step of treatment, is building that foundation. But if you are doing that alone, it's going to take you forever to build that house. You're going to run into issues where you don't know what you're doing. But if you can have resources like treatment, medical services, support group meetings, peer supports, etc., you're going to get that house built much quicker, but it's still going to take time.
That is a very good analogy. It's like you can build that house by yourself if you have no experience or no knowledge in how to do it. It's going to take you a hell of a long time to do it, but yeah, if you can get some help from people that do know what they're doing and help you figure out the best way to go about accomplishing that, yeah, it's going to work a lot easier. But that foundation is so important. I mean, if you build your foundation on not solid footing, doesn't matter how beautiful the house is you build on top of it, that house will crumble away because it doesn't, the foundation won't hold up. So, I mean, there's kind of that piece too, is being able to, really kind of at the beginning to really try to, provide a good place for people to start from. And I think that happens through not, getting rid of that judgment, to getting rid of that, kind of maybe trying to eliminate some of those barriers. Again, back to meeting people where they're at.
And expanding more on judgment. I mean, for people who want to knock harm reduction, ask yourself why you're so against it. I think that education is the best thing that we can arm ourselves with. And so if you don't understand it, educate yourself, because there's resources for that as well.
I mean, this might, be a little, rub some people the wrong way that are potentially listening to this, but I guess that's maybe a little bit point of these discussions too. But you think of, when I first started talking about this, I had kind of a discussion. I think you and I were talking about. I was talking about it with my mom, but I said, think about something like Alzheimer's. You have a population of people that have essentially degeneration in their brain that takes away from their ability to be able to live their lives and manage their lives independently. We have facilities set up where we can put those people, into more of a managed care type of a setting where they have resources provided for them so that they can live as healthy and happily, I suppose, as they can for where they're at within their lives. And, it's really, about making them comfortable, treating them with humanity and dignity, and allowing them to continue to, live their lives. Harm reduction, when to me, when we start talking about that in regards to alcohol and drugs, it's the same thing. So why are we willing to treat one population of people with a chronic illness one way, but then have another population of people that are suffering from a very similar chronic disease in an entirely different way?
Well, maybe, I don't know, I'm feeling a little feisty with this subject, but, we as professionals and the medical field, there's a reason why this is even going on, right? The harm reduction, it's, again, there is evidence that shows that that it works and that it's beneficial.
Well, one of the things I can maybe just say really quick too, I mean, looking at, like within our own state is, at least from what I found, Minot, Bismarck, well, Mandan, Fargo, and Grand Forks all have essentially harm reduction centers that are operating, that are providing a lot of these services. And that's maybe something I wanted to get out there too, that sometimes in North Dakota, it may seem like we are maybe wouldn't have those types of services available, but they're there, within our community. I mean, I found a lot of information just by Googling it. So, I mean, it's there for people if they want to find it too. But you can also, contact, whether it be like a treatment agency such as ourselves, to be able to find out more information on this, or, go to, I suppose, like here in mine would be like First District. Well, they're actually the ones that I believe are kind of managing or offering the harm reduction in Minot. Talking about something like with the stages of change, I mean, I think that that's a worthwhile thing to talk about. I mean, even for like, laymen or non-professionals, because just kind of gives you an idea of kind of where the person's at in their addiction, and can increase just kind of some awareness of you know this person isn't going to be rational. This person is in a place right now, like if they're in a pre-contemplative state or whatever, meaning, they're high in denial. I don't have a problem. I don't know what the big deal is. You need to just leave me alone. Instead of battling with them on that and just being like, why can't you get this? If we can see that that's essentially where they're at, their stage of change, then maybe we have the ability to be able to say, okay, what does work here? Because, it would be something about, well, maybe, I can, just try to talk with them, let them know that I'm there for them, I support them. I can maybe make suggestions, towards, maybe seeking out some of these other services, or just to, try and promote awareness. But I think the big thing with family is also just kind of compassion and support, and realizing that maybe there is also a need just to set a boundary there. I mean, that's a hard thing too, but it's, kind of reaching that point where it's like, I love you, but I can't go down this road with you, instead of just battling with the person on a day-to-day basis, being able just to accept where they're at and say, this person maybe isn't, at a point now where, they're gonna even be open to help. So instead of, investing all of this energy and letting this destroy me as well, maybe I need to just set some boundaries here.
So, with people not familiar with the stages of change, I mean, we can just kind of go into detail a little bit about that. Primarily, there's 5 stages of change.
Mhm.
Um, so, stage 1 is going to be that pre-contemplation, and so basically, what that looks like is the person is using. They don't see any issue with what it is that they're doing. They're not acknowledging any consequences. Um, Considering even quitting is not what's on their mind at that time. Stage 2 is going to be the contemplation stage of change, where, okay, now, maybe some legal consequences have come up. Maybe what I'm doing is becoming overwhelming and unmanageable. I should probably think about quitting, but they haven't stopped the behaviors. Stage 3 is going to be that preparation stage of change, where they might have reduced their using, they might have started looking into ways to stop undesirable behaviors. And then we get into stage 4, which is the action stage of change. So at this point, the person is reaching out. Maybe they're going to treatment. Maybe they have, tried to be sober for a week or two. And then after that action stage, we go into the maintenance stage.
Mhm.
Hopefully, if the goal is abstinence, they're no longer using, they're engaging in healthy activities, support groups, therapy, etc. And then the stage 6, which some people might argue shouldn't be in there, but stage 6 is relapse, or another term that can be used is a lapse. So the way that I like to explain the difference between a relapse and a lapse is, a lapse might be kind of like what you said earlier. A person has been abstinent for so long, and maybe they fall off for a couple of days, and are using, but then they get back on track. A relapse is a prolonged period of use where there is no attempt to get back on track. They're just, I guess, full out using again and engaging in addictive behaviors.
When I think of relapse too, relapse is a process. I mean, a lot of times we see, relapse, the end part of the relapse, which is the use. We think that's what relapse is, but really there is a whole series of things that happen building up to the use that are all part of relapse. From, like, for example, like complacency or getting stuck, and like if you were in the maintenance program, which like you said was including like going to meetings, maybe you were involved in other supports. I mean, you had, you were going to your job, maybe you were continuing to attend like an aftercare or therapy group, but I mean, really like actively working your relapse and recovery plan. And, the complacency or getting stuck is when I stopped kind of doing those things. All of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm tired, I'm not going to go to that meeting. And all of a sudden I went from going to like 2 meetings a week to now all of a sudden I haven't been to a meeting for a month, and then it just progresses from there as, I kind of stop actively working that relapse and recovery plan, letting little things kind of pile up, and just, not dealing with problems as well as I was, internalizing things more, becoming, more and more unhealthy on the inside, which then starts to spill over into our outside behavior, and then, seeking out like old people, places, and things, addictive thinking. And then, yeah, the end result ultimately being use and then full blown relapses where we cycle fully back into our active addiction.
And so it's important, again, that we have harm reduction sites, because when we see people in the pre-contemplation stage of change, and that contemplation stage is when they're court ordered or when they're ordered by probation or CPS. So those people who aren't externally motivated to participate in services are going to continue to use, and maybe we can catch them at a harm reduction site and further that stage of change.
Well, I think it's a realization too that there might be people that are never going to get past their pre-contemplation or even contemplation. They might not be able to get to a point where they're ready to like actively like take action as far as changing their substance use behavior, their lives. I mean, and instead of, I guess, it's acknowledging that and saying, well, how do we help this person so that, well, like we said earlier, can remain, somewhat healthy. We can, help them to manage, their disease in a way in which doesn't have all of these, really terrible, consequences for the individual and for, I guess, kind of the world around them. And I think that that's, again, the most important thing from this discussion is just, it's a brutal acceptance of reality. We want to use that term. You may not like it, but it is what it is. Yeah. Well, anything else that you want to say or you want to get into?
I think we've had a decent, I guess, introduction or overview of harm reduction sites and being able to inform our community that there is availability in our area and within the state as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, also maybe, this discussion can help people to maybe start thinking about it, kind of maybe get rid of or challenge maybe some of these kind of archaic ideas or beliefs that, we maybe have about, what we think recovery should look like, or, I guess, how, even the individual should go about like approaching change or whatever, and really challenging maybe some of those expectations that we have. But, well, then I guess that'll be it for episode 5. So I guess we maybe won't have one next week, but nonetheless, anything else?
We will see you for the next episode.
All right. Thank you for your time.